This is Gender in Focus. I'm Elle, and each week I sit down with the president of Transfocus Consulting and all-round gender diversity genius, Kai Scott. I get to ask all the questions you've ever wanted to ask about how to make the workplace and the world a better place for trans and non-binary people. Let's get into it.
In this episode, we're talking about trans and non-binary joy and happiness, something that we miss when we talk about all the real and present challenges. But there's a lot of amazing stuff about being trans and non-binary, and we want to explore that in today's episode. So I'm really excited to get into it here with you, Elle, today. So yeah, let's get started.
I'm so thrilled about this topic that we're talking about today. And I wanted to start with just asking you, why is it important to center trans joy and not just kind of focus on the struggles and the challenges around that?
Yeah, so we want to appreciate and understand and unpack the challenges. And there's an important exercise in doing that. There's a time and place for it. But unfortunately, if we only focus on the struggles, then ourselves and others may misunderstand that we're these multidimensional beings that have ups and downs just like everybody else. And we can almost be kind of categorized as this other in only having struggle. I once was in a conversation where we were kind of unpacking, some of the kind of really exciting things about being trans. And the person I was talking to, who was cisgender, was completely befuddled and almost perplexed. Like, where's the trans struggle, right? And was almost insisting on it. And I was like, oh, yeah, we also experience joy and really cool stuff. So it's just maybe not over-indexing on one in a way that ignores or like almost makes invisible the really wonderful things, right? And so doing both and balancing that, I think, is really important.
Right. So what does happiness for trans and non-binary people look like in everyday life? If you were, kind of focusing on all the positives and this person that you were talking to
Mhm.
was quite surprised by the fact that there are some positives, what does that look like on an everyday basis?
Oof, there's so many things that trans people are excited about and create great happiness. I mean, some of it is just shared in common with cisgender folks, right? The everyday things like connection with friends and family and acquaintances and, going on walks and, being a part of volunteer community or perhaps a faith community where there's a deep meaning that's generated for folks. So those are kind of one category of things. And then there's the kind of trans-specific joy and happiness that as there's a struggle to figure oneself out and that, there's something off and amiss. And maybe that's a mystery for a long time, maybe even decades. And then coming out of that with, finally crystallizing what it's really about. And that understanding is like really just invigorating because, finally have come to terms with who one really is. And there's a lot of joy in that, a lot of happiness, a lot of release that, was kind of pent up in, either confusion or realizing something, but being scared to share with others. And so that joy is very specific to being trans and having the kind of what is called gender dysphoria, which is almost a contrast to gender euphoria. So those two kind of operating together and being in tension. But there's also, if people choose to, and not every trans or non-binary person chooses to undertake gender affirming care, that can be another source of joy where finally we can feel at home in our bodies, where perhaps before there was a struggle with that. So that can be another source of joy. I found too, in my personal experience, the connection with community to be a particularly wonderful experience where people who are going through similar experiences, where you don't have to explain, where it's just very easy to exchange pronouns or to appreciate or understand or ask really thoughtful questions to surface even more understanding about oneself and the gender diversity that we have. This is so beautiful and very touching. I have now, related to coming out as trans, so many folks that either I've connected online or offline, And so there's so many different areas where we can find that joy through having this experience.
How does mainstream media kind of shape our
Mhm.
understanding of that? Because you've talked about this joy that comes from being trans and comes from connecting with other people, but I know, at least from my experience of this, one of the things that made me really frightened to come out was this
Mhm.
idea of, like, everything's going to be really negative and
Yeah.
everything's going to be really scary and nobody's going to be accepting. And so there is this kind of narrative that's played on.
Mhm.
How does that kind of shape our understanding of trans experiences?
That's so true, and I can relate to that because I think about movies like Boys Don't Cry. Like, that's traumatic for somebody who
Hmm.
is thinking about coming out and thinking about, oh, these are going to be these dire consequences, which there are for some,
Hmm.
right? Like, it's not that it's made up in any way, uh, but if that's the only thing that can really draw people to stay in within themselves without sharing with others, and but unfortunately, if that's the only thing that's represented, that could really have a damaging impact on folks who are like, "Oh dear, like this is too much. I don't know if I can handle, social exclusion, violence, a whole number of other things that are represented on the screen." And certainly, I'm not saying that we shouldn't represent any of that. That is really powerful stuff, even for cisgender people to realize just how much we're up against in certain segments even more, right? If you think about trans people or even trans women of color, like there is very serious violence there, and it's important to showcase that. But I would say, especially if trans people are involved in the screenwriting or even writing articles, you can see that there's a balance that is struck. Even like a series such as Pose, they really did show the real hard aspects of that life, but they also showed self determination and agency and laughter, like in the face of like some really awful stuff that these trans women, particularly Black trans women, face, and some non-binary folks as well. And so, I think that's important to show the fullness of that experience, so that people are, it's not just folks who are coming out, but even to be feel good in oneself as one is out in the world. That
Hmm.
can really help to just texturize the experiences and have all of them represented and reflected.
You talked a bit earlier about gender euphoria. Can you explain that a bit for those who haven't experienced it?
Yes. So it's a term that maybe is a little bit more, it's been in the community, but I think in broader society it's coming through a little bit more. But as the word suggests, euphoria is like an extreme amount of joy and excitement and just be feeling electric, and that being associated with one's gender specifically. And I think for some, especially if they're perhaps cisgender, they may not connect to that
Hmm.
because maybe they haven't had so many like standout moments where it felt like really good to be one's gender. And so that tends to be something a little bit more what trans folks experience. And as I mentioned, it is in contrast to the gender dysphoria, or there's an interplay with the gender dysphoria, which is about not feeling at home, whether in one's body or in one's social roles related to one's gender. So if there's kind of having to have figure it out or be in struggle with it, then when that is released in some way, whether figuring something out, coming out, or having some sort of gender affirming care, that can bring about this like just such a strong sense of joy. It's really hard to describe, but it's like every cell in your body is alive. It's very cool.
What's your own experiences of gender euphoria? Do you mind if
Yeah.
do you mind if I ask that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking. I think it's really important to ask folks, to make sure they're comfortable sharing this, even if it is about something good, right?
Mhm.
Uh, because some people are a bit shy or want to be more private about that. But certainly, I'm very excited to talk about gender euphoria. For me, what that looked like is I certainly when I first came out and started to undertake gender affirming care. Particularly, I had top surgery, and I'm an avid runner. And so, one of the first orders of priority, once it was safe and everything was healed properly, I wanted to go running topless or without my shirt on. And that was like very exhilarating to experience that for the first time, because I felt very strongly that uh, that aspect of my body was I had a struggle with for a long time. And so once I got to do what I felt I should have been doing all along, it was just this wonderful, beautiful moment. It's very kind of simple in some way, but it was just this big moment, a big shift, and a sense of relief and excitement, and I really enjoyed that. I also, when I came out as trans for the first time, and I was just so relieved that, and I had so much extra energy because I was applying before that, applying it to like figuring out what was going on, and figuring out how to share with other people, and there's just a huge amount of pressure
Yeah.
to figure it out and share, that once I did it, I had so much extra energy. I didn't know what to do with myself. So I learned how to play the trumpet because I needed to like e- exude this exciting noise. Now, I don't think my neighbors were all too excited about this direction, but this is just tells you just how freeing it is by contrast to what was before. And so there's just a few examples. Certainly at work as well, to be able to be more open with others. I was able to be more vulnerable in a way that other people responded in kind, and it drew us closer to some of the colleagues, and there wasn't as much of a barrier that was there before, and they could really sense it, I could sense it, and it actually allowed me to have closer relationships that made our work much more seamless and effortless, and there wasn't as much conflict, or even not necessarily like direct conflict, but just like an undercurrent of stress. It was kind of that was not eliminated because there's still stress related to work, but it just went that much easier. So there's just a few examples from my own personal experience around gender euphoria.
I love that story of you getting into trumpet. That's so funny. My first experience of gender euphoria was with you actually when you use my
Mm.
pronouns. I cried for 6 hours after that. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Yeah.
Because you were the first one to change to using they them pronouns. And yeah, I was so like electric. I had never understood what gender euphoria was.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm around people who talk about gender euphoria, and I love it for them. But I
Wow.
had no concept of what that was until that moment.
Oh,
I didn't even realize how important it was to me until that moment.
that's the key. I think that you
Mhm.
put a hit on such an important thing, and thank you for sharing your story too, because that's so powerful. That we kind of make do with a lot of things, and are like, how big is it really,
Mhm.
and then once you take that step and people respond in kind, like it's earth shattering. I
Mhm.
know it feels like maybe a hyperbole, but it isn't. It's just it's so fundamental, foundational, and powerful, and
Mhm.
in ways that totally understand 6 hours. Like I, when I had top surgery and the relief after that, I had a moment too of just crying and crying, and not because I was sad or upset or anything. It was just
Mhm.
pure tears of joy, like just
Mhm.
relief and joy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such a weird experience if you've never experienced it before,
Mhm.
because like I had been well, because I go by she, they pronouns, and
Mm.
I had approached this by saying, "Oh, but she's fine. Like you can use she, her,
Yeah.
absolutely fine, and it is fine. It affirms me equally." But I had never experienced that other.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
suddenly it was like it was so overwhelming. And if you remember, I asked you to stop talking because it was so overwhelming, and we were recording a podcast episode, and so I wish I hadn't because I
Mhm.
really I needed to hear what you were saying, but yeah, it completely shocked me. I wasn't expecting it. So what a great feeling.
Yeah, 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 and understandable, you're like, "Time out. I gotta regroup."
Oh, if I'd started crying, I
Mm,
wouldn't have stopped, as I didn't as soon as we got off the call.
right.
But yeah,
Mm,
funny. The best feeling. Not something I had experienced before. And you kind of mentioned that actually that this is something that really only trans and non-binary people experience. But is that kind of always the case, or
mm.
is there any research about this, about whether cis people experience this?
Yeah. As the resident data nerd, I have dug into
Of
this
course
and
you have. Of course you
yes,
have.
we've got to have the numbers, right? So, yeah, so there has been some preliminary research. I think more needs to be done to fully understand. But among several thousand folks down in the United States, we there has been some data collected. Both cisgender and transgender people were surveyed on their gender experiences, particularly focused on if they've experienced gender euphoria. And it was very clear that, more than trans people experience it more than cisgender people by a
Mhm.
factor of about 3 to 4 times as much, right? So among trans folks, the survey says 73% have experienced gender euphoria, so quite a high level, probably the majority of folks.
Mhm.
And then by contrast, cisgender folks experience about 15% of the time, 1 5, so much lower levels. Again, I think that has to do somewhat with the struggle in contrast to the
Mhm.
happiness and euphoria. There is a release in that, and um, for cisgender folks, there are obviously struggles related to gender, but there's not as much related to either their roles or their bodies, and so as a result, there's it just kind of hum along, right?
Mhm.
There's no ups. Maybe there's a few, like maybe there's a little bit up, a little bit down, but it's not big contrast, right?
Mhm.
So that's part of what could be going on, and certainly the research reflects that. And so it's really interesting to see just how much of a difference there is there because of that, those differences in experiences. But cisgender do experience it, but just at a much smaller level. Don't remember exactly what their euphoria is linked to. Yeah, so I can't remember exactly that one, but there is some aspect of euphoria.
How can workplaces kind of foster environments where gender euphoria is more experienced, or trans people in general are just more celebrated and their joy is recognized
Mhm.
and fostered?
Yeah, it's a really good one to think through because sometimes, as we mentioned at the outset, if we're only thinking about the struggles, yes, we're trying to eliminate those struggles. But I think there's something beyond just eliminating struggles. It's how do we enhance the joy
Mhm.
that already exists, and rather than tamping it down or whatnot.
Yeah.
So there's a few different ways that can happen. I think kind of the more subtle side is just making it no big deal, right? Whether it's exchanging pronouns or if somebody is changing their first name, being really proactive to get that right and to adopt pronouns quickly. Maybe need a little extra practice to make that happen, but
Mhm.
those are very powerful things. It may seem minor, but as you were explaining, it's actually a really big deal. And if people can land that as quickly as possible, without a big fanfare of like, what's this all about? I don't get it. Or, any other type of kind of dialogue that sometimes occurs when something new presents itself, so much the better. If it can be just like, okay, no problem. And then implemented as quickly as possible. But
Mhm.
of course, there's also other things that if people are excited, maybe they're coming out for the first time and they're really excited about this. I mean, there are some people who are a little bit more private and they just don't really want to talk about it, and we want to honor that. But I'm talking about the folks who are like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about figuring this out. I love sharing this with other folks, is to provide them with an opportunity in some way or another, right? Whether it's a blurb in the newsletter, if you have one, or even a panel that you could put together in inviting them, if they wish, to be on that panel to tell their story. These are very powerful, impactful ways that you can kind of amplify what's coming up for them in a way that you're providing space for them to share that if they so wish. We're never forcing folks or expecting folks to do that, but if they're there, like, this is a way that people can connect on an emotional, mental level on this topic. And that could be wonderful for everybody involved. Certainly allowing them to, share in any other way that they think would be useful to them. Um, and then I'm trying to think of some other strategies, but those are some of the first ones that come to mind, where it's kind of more subtle, and then maybe bigger efforts that can be used to help to amplify that joy. Certainly sharing newsletter articles, if you don't have a trans person that you know of in your midst. You can share articles where people are showing that joy. Art is a very beautiful way for people to express that. So there could be ways that you could show that art and display it, and highlight that this is a trans artist if they've shared that information. Yeah. So there's just a few ideas.
And sort of on a wider scale, if that's at work in general, how can allies kind of make space for trans joy, or what role can they play in that?
Mhm. Yeah, coworkers are a huge deal. Because of course, we spend a lot of time with coworkers, and to the degree that people can show up for trans and non-binary folks, if they've come out for the first time or they've always been out and they just continuously, excited about some aspect, and being an active listener to understand, to take time, go for lunch and hear that person's story if they're really wanting to share it, to you know uh, it, read things that you can share with that trans person to show that you really care and that you're really excited about whatever aspect they're really yeah is creating a lot of joy for them. There can be also ways that you can go to events where uh, trans and non-binary folks, whether it's dance or poetry readings or whatnot, where you can say, "Hey, as a colleague, let's go check this event out together. It sounds really interesting." And there are ways that, again, connecting with community can be so powerful if they haven't already done that, and then that shows that you understand that it's good learning for the ally, and then it's a
Mhm.
really powerful connection for the trans and non-binary person. Again, just a few ideas off the top of my head on how to do that.
I think what you were talking about with excitement resonates so much, because that was one of the things that was so great when I told you. I mean, I'm also in a hugely privileged position where my colleague is the president of Transfocus.
True.
So, it's probably going to go down well. When I told you, your reaction was, and you were the only person to do this, no shade to anybody else, but because I had been trying to make it as small as possible and not
Mm,
noticeable to people almost, everyone kind of matched my energy and was very calm about it. So you were the first person to actually be excited for me. And then
mm.
I was like, oh, I can be excited about this. I'm allowed to feel excited about it. So, yeah, I think making that space for that excitement, I didn't know how excited I was until you made that space. Having someone make room for that is just, it's just such a kind thing to do.
Oh my gosh. I thank you for sharing that, because that's it. It's these very subtle moments that people might not even realize what the power of what they've just done to provide that space, that permission to, ease into and be
Yeah.
fully oneself. Like, I can appreciate there's like sometimes, depending on the context, a bit of timidity of like how much can I lean into this, and wondering and wanting to make sure everybody else is okay too, right? That just having that full space to lean into whatever's needed and coming up is so powerful. Ah, that's so cool.
Oh, I will never
Ah,
forget it. I will never forget that, because it was really pivotal for me.
mm,
No, everyone else would have done that if I had, I think, made it clear that I was excited,
right.
but I didn't. I didn't know. So no shade on anyone else.
Sometimes there is a time and space for it to be like, yep, got it, and we're on it, but then sometimes that excitement, it feels like a big emotion, at least in my experience, and I don't want to put that on people, and so I do hold it back, versus if there's somebody who can receive that, then it's like, oh yeah, let's lean into this, right? Really exciting
Mhm.
moment. Yeah.
When you talked about gender euphoria, and certainly this is my experience, and the experience of people that I know, but it seems to be that when I've spoken to cisgender people about it, they've kind of assumed that it has to be a very big thing, like there are these big moments. But
Mhm.
really, I think more commonly, gender euphoria is actually in the quite small things. So it could be
Mhm.
seeing
Mhm.
your first name on a letter for the first time, or hearing it called out in a doctor's waiting room,
Mhm.
or something like that. These are the moments that really bring the joy. It's the small things more often than not.
Oh, yeah, totally, and they, like we were talking about before, can catch you by surprise too, where you're just
Mhm,
like, "Oh, I didn't know I needed that," or it was gonna be so powerful. But yeah, you're
mhm,
right, it is the very subtle things, and so not discounting as an ally, the inclination to do something in a
mhm.
positive and supportive vein, and to provide that, of course, observing the response to see, if that landed or not, but, yeah, it can be so wonderful and really cool. Hmm.
Do you have any experiences on a professional level of gender euphoria?
Yeah, so the coming out to colleagues, while very scary at first, there were a lot of joyful moments in that people, like you were describing, kind of really received me in that information, rather than. I don't think I was worried so much as about hostility, so much as I was just like, okay, whatever, like that kind of flat line response.
Mhm.
And when I didn't get that, it was like, it felt really, really good, and very exciting to be a part of that. I'm trying to think of other instances, like within a professional context, where there's this kind of euphoria, maybe because like, if I'm doing data analysis or whatnot, I'm already experiencing uh, data euphoria. But yeah, I can't think of any at present. But if I do, I'll let you know.
Sure. I have one kind of
Mm,
big question for you here. If we were all in a dream world and
mm.
trans people could flourish without any barriers, what would that look like?
Oof, what's the vision?
Hmm.
And it's interesting. I asked that like maybe a few dozen, like a 5 or so, 6 or so years ago, to a group of trans folks, and at first people were stumped. Right? It was just
Hmm.
because we're having to focus on all the things that we're trying to fix. It can feel so overwhelming or like a lot. So there's not the kind of what's after that
Hmm.
thinking that could go on. But I think it's so valuable to reflect on that. Because of course we want to go beyond just having no problems. We do want to thrive, right? And really be our full selves, not only our full selves, but then with the freedom that that brings, freedom from being mired in struggle, to be able to apply that to things that we love or that are meaningful to us. And I think there's something to be said about, if I have a vision of the future, it's like, we're not only celebrated but sought after because we have a unique perspective on the world. Certainly not purely unique. I mean, I think other group people also have unique perspectives, but that we're seen as an important puzzle piece to put into the tapestry of humanity. And people not only feel something's missing when we're not at the table or not in the mix, but that they're like, oh, we're gonna miss out too, right? It's not just that trans and non-binary folks will miss out by not being there, but that they will miss out. And I similarly want to feel that, and do, um, with other equity groups, right? So they're just, we feel incomplete when we're not
Hmm.
with each other, kind of thing. And then the insights, the innovations, the things that will solve for humanity, not just for ourselves, because we're free to be ourselves. I think that's what I'm really excited about, and where I can see a future where how we design things, whether buildings that we design, or cities, or even digital stuff. We've got AI on the front, like how we can do that in an ethical way. I feel like trans people could have a really important contribution to that. I I once met somebody who was working in quantum computing and was really advanced because they had had so many different experiences when it comes to gender, that they were just able to grasp quantum computing, I think, on another level than others. Of course, I'm not in the field, so I can't technically say if that's the case. So this might be more vibes based than evidence based, but I did get a sense that they were well in advance of being able to contribute to that field because of their experiences. And I'm thinking that could be said about other groups as well, but certainly I think for trans folks. So that's very beautiful. Now, whether people are able to see that and value it, I don't know. That might vary person to person, but hopefully in this bright, beautiful new world with trans joy at the center, it will unlock people to really fully be there. And we're already doing that, even though we're struggling. So I can see that just being tenfold, right?
For sure. Any final thoughts on trans joy and overall happiness?
Oh yeah, just if if you're trans and non-binary yourself, finding that joy at all costs, or not all costs, but as much as you can, and that's a really important thing. And to covet it and safeguard it and amplify it with people that you surround yourself with. Certainly for cisgender people, is to understand gender euphoria. You also deserve gender euphoria, in my opinion, right? So maybe there's something that if you have trans people in your life, or you can search online to better understand that gender euphoria, to tap into it for yourself. What are ways that you're holding back certain aspects of yourself to align with societal expectations that don't quite fit you, that prevent you or keep you from your own gender euphoria? And then I would just say that organizations can be stewards, and like good stewards of joy, gender joy, whether they be for trans people or for cisgender people, by implementing safe spaces for people to express that joy.
So, where can people find you, Kai, living your euphoric life online?
Doing backflips and playing
Playing
my
the trumpet.
trumpet. Sadly, it's in my storage unit here, so it hasn't been played in a while. But yes, we're on all the social medias: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, etc. And also, we have a newsletter that comes out monthly with fantastic resources. So, yeah, be sure to sign up for that on our website. And yeah, look forward to staying in touch, and look forward to the next episode where we unpack yet another important topic, such as trans joy.
Great. See you later.
Bye for now.